It's the Lekker Rugby Pod, only on Megaphone Rugby.
It's the Lekker Rugby Pod, episode 47. Thank you for joining us. And please don't forget to subscribe to this channel, Megaphone Rugby, the home of your favorite podcast. And this episode is going to deal specifically with injuries that rugby players suffer. And we're going to be looking at all three the big South African games that happened in the URC this weekend. So without any further ado, let's get back to Harry. Okay, Harry, as a Bulls fan this weekend, I was very happy. And I mean, at halftime, I thought, geez, we're out of it. We lost Ruan. And then, calamity, we lost Elrich. So before we talk about the game, and I think how well the Bulls played, how well the Lions played for a big part of that game, and they gave us all a bit of heart palpitations. The injury, that was terrible. And you also had a role to play there. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I kind of felt like Jonah in the whale almost. And I'll explain why. So as you know, being involved in this analysis and getting involved in punditry and writing articles, you become friends with people and you just become connected. And it's interesting because your friendship in a way is formed by the rugby, but does it survive? Does it surpass that? Is it better than that? Is it bigger than that? Do you actually become friends? And I'm happily can report that that's true across the vast majority of my friendships in rugby. Don't depend on whether you're going well or you're a coach that got fired or you're a player that got hurt. But this particular day, the dad of Elrich Lowe, David Lowe, had kind of connected up with me to just chat, and it was gratifying, it was fun because he was talking about how he values my opinion, and we were just gonna talk about it. You know how people do nowadays? It's almost like you watch a match, but you watch it with your WhatsApp on the side, and you have your familiar people about that team. Like, it's Leicester Tigers. I'm gonna chat with Jared Wright, or it's something involving the Quins. So maybe Charlie Morgan's there, so I'll chat with him. And our players are the same way. Maybe they're not playing that day or whatever. So, yeah, Elrich's dad and I are chatting, and it literally comes out that one of the reasons why David cannot really watch the game is because he's watching his daughter do show jumping. And I was struck by the fact that, you have a son and a daughter, and they're both, no matter what the prestige of the sport or how many other people are watching it, for you, it's just the same. It's like 2 faults, 4 faults. Is the horse going to land right? You could fall off a horse too. It's hard. It's a hard sport, and an amazing sport, show jumping, all the equestrian groups. And so he couldn't really watch. So he was valuing the fact that I could ping him with details, So, and obviously he's more interested in what's happening with his son. My daughter strolls in. There's a sleepover. She's got some of her friends, and they're at the right age to say this, so don't worry, guys. She goes, "Oh, that guy's cute." Talking about Elrich. And then they're debating, like, is it Quan Horn or him who's the cutest guy? And they kind of just go, "Oh, we like that guy." And I go, "That's funny because I'm talking about that guy," to his dad right now. And so we're all together adopting this thing. And at some points, his wife has to take the text, tell him, because he's doing something with the horses. I don't know what he's doing. And it's going so well. I mean, Elrich, I don't know if you remember, but he had about 10 or 11 involvements that were really, really good. Hard, cleans, chip passes. Elrich was getting over the gain line, and he was really playing very well in concert with Cameron Honeycomb and Marcel Coetzee. It was a bit overplayed in a way. The Bulls were playing almost too much rugby, but it was impressive. And so I'm giving these reports, pinging in WhatsApp. And then at some point I have to go, "Ooh, guys, you're not going to like this." And literally, it's when Elrich hits that impact, tries for second effort, gets rolled over. When you have multiple tackles and that dynamic shear effect of high-low can happen to you, all bets are off. But instantly, anyone who's been around any kind of collision, combat sport, dynamic, if you've ever been injured yourself, you knew. A tough guy like Elrich going down in that way, writhing around on the ground, and the number of people and the way they stabilized it. So here I am, and Elrich's dad is going, "So what happened? Is it tell me." And I'm like, "Ooh, I want you to be careful. I want you to process this. He's like, is it ankle? Is it knee?" And I was like, it's about the whole leg, basically, the left leg. but they're going to find their way. They stabilized it, and it looked really, really bad. And I said, do not watch the footage. And we kind of carried on from there, and we're still carrying on, and we're going to carry on talking about it. And one of the things I've told him, like almost immediately, is that Elrich should know that there's people who care about him, and he's about to find out who really cares about him. Because sometimes people are only friends with you, hang around with you when you are, the chosen one, the Springbok, the second choice, 8 and second choice, 7, maybe 6 for the Springboks. And you're young and you're on the way up and you're the captain of the Bulls and everything is going your way. But when you've ever found yourself in life on a reverse, whether it's your career, whether you got fired, you got a divorce, you did something really bad, you did something you said you never would do, and you did that thing, and now you're disgraced. But injury is tough one in rugby because it's going to happen to you, and not necessarily is catastrophic, but it will happen to you. 1,000 hours of rugby played, it's basically 40 injuries per. So that means you're gonna get injured. It's the odds are not in your favor. The problem for Elrich in that kind of injury is you're at least a year out, and life moves on, and the physical is one thing, the medicine is there, the doctors are there, the physios are there, the rehab is there. It's the psychological feeling, the pit of despair. You define yourself, especially as young men, you define yourself on what you do, what your career is. And when that's in doubt in any way, like it's happening with many people, many players have this moment of crisis. Steven Kitshoff is having this moment right now where he's trying to pull together. What do I do? Am I going to do this or not? And we don't know about that for Elrich. He might come back just like Sia Kolisi or Dan Sheehan was back for Leinster about a year of rehab. But it was a really strange way. I couldn't fully focus on the rugby after that point. It was a pall was over me. It was like my daughter started crying. Well, so from her standpoint, she had just sat down and was having breakfast, and we're having a good time watching it and having fun and thinking of funny things to say back and forth, and then boom, that happens. And so I understood it. I understood it from the family, the Lowe family, of how horrendous that is. You're over here with the show jumping, you have to get back, you have to go to the hospital. And you also always knew it could happen. Rugby is forever and forevermore going to be a sport where it's gladiatorial. You go out there into the arena and you are always one bad fall away from this happening to you. Every study I've found with injury across all the sports, all the regions we play rugby, it's one of the most dangerous sports. And we can mitigate the head injury as much as we want. And that's a good thing. We should, and we have. But the lower body injuries are more prevalent. The ankle, the knee, the ACL, the hamstring. These things are a matter of the nature of the beast. And the higher you go in each level, so the age, as you get to 26, 27, 28, 30, it's a higher rate of injury. The skill level, so the higher you go in the game, the worse the injury count is. And the stakes, and that also applies to derbies. And I know this is something that really irritates you, is the carnage of the derby. Is there a way we could have a gentleman's agreement? But I guess not. People care about derbies and they play a little bit harder and they go in a little bit hot.
No, I said to you this thing about Elrich. It was the same for me. I said to my wife, I can't believe this happened, because David and I have also been talking the whole day and the likes, and then suddenly he goes down. And I just said, I don't know why we have to be so physical. I'm not saying anybody did anything on purpose. It was a pure rugby incident. But the bad thing for me about this whole injury was I called it a nothing burger. It happened in the middle of nowhere. Yes, it was a bit of an impressive run, and it was great. He tried to make it, but nothing was on. It was just starting the second half sort of a thing. And it just sort of derailed this entire year now. And hopefully he can make a comeback. I want to ask you, you mentioned the physical toll is one thing. Can you recover, or how quickly can you recover? Let's call it that rather. But the mental side of it, the psychological side of it. Remember Dion Fourie said when he came back to the Stormers after almost a year or more than a year, was it 9 months as well? At one stage, he said to his wife, I think I should just call it quits, I should just leave it and get it over. And she sort of, kicked his butt and motivated him to come back or, continue his comeback. But I wonder, that psychological thing, like you said, you're not in the team anymore, you're not in the change room anymore, you're not part of the discussions, you were the captain. Are you going to hobble into Loftus for a bit and then hear a bit, but you're not going to be in the loop or in the inside circle. And that extends to the Springboks as well. Now, you mentioned that he was sort of a given for the bench, at least 7-8 replacement.
Yeah.
And almost an indispensable part of the Springboks he became, and it's a good career move, trajectory. I mean, if you think, it wasn't even the group when the original Springbok squad was selected. How do you overcome that psychological side of it? What makes you strong enough to be able to do that? I'm not saying Elrich won't. I'm sure he will. But that to me is, if Dion Fourie can think about giving it up, I mean, that guy's as tough as anything. How do you cope with that?
Yo, and sometimes for a guy like Dion Fourie, who's undersized and has to go into the land of giants. Artie Savea talks about this very honestly, that he is scared. He is scared at every impact. The reason why he shouts and roars, and everyone who plays against Artie realizes, well, no one told me about this. He's roaring, screaming, shouting, is because he said he is pissing his pants scared because he's never the big guy in the collision. And Dion Fourie goes, goes where monsters live. He's delving around in the land of giants. He's really not that big a fellow. So there's some of that, of what you have to do to work yourself up to be a Michael Hooper, a Dion Fourie, the undersized character. Then you have Elrich is a big guy. He's built big. He's got big joints. He was not, ever bullied, in school, whatever. He's not that guy. But the problem is the planting of your foot and the explosion of your knee is a big psychological problem. Anyone who's had that knee go on you, and the longer you live, the more likely you have. Not in a dramatic way, not in being tackled in the field, but it just goes. It pops. An Achilles pops. And the degree to which you trust yourself to explode into a G-Forces tackle against Wallace Satiti against the All Blacks, the first time out is, I don't know, there's a tendency to shirk away. I've had one really bad injury. I had a lot of, broken bones, fingers, nose 3 times, the normal stuff. But I had one where I was really worried, and it was head to head. I tried to zig. The other guy tried to zig at the same time. So our heads met, concussion, knockout, but also the neck was flipped. And I, went home and just stabilized, but it was 2 days later and I couldn't feel my fingers. I couldn't feel my hands properly. I started having really dark thoughts. But not only was I not going to play rugby again, I was old enough where that wasn't going to be that big a deal. It was just for fun, even though it was a pretty good level. I was like, what if I cannot do life anymore? What if my life is affected? And I remember thinking, I'm never going to go into a contact again. Well, I did. I played about a year later, but it was almost like I wonder about Sam Cane with a broken neck, JD Schickerling with a broken neck. How do you possibly do that? I mean, I just was such a wimp in that game, the next game I played. I was just looking to not be in contact. And I know you get hurt worse when you do that. So it was time for me to hang up the boots. I think that stuff is the hardest. And my reflection is it's all very personal. It doesn't make one person tougher than another, by the way. There's just some people different. And you got to talk yourself into a frenzy to play open side flanker in a test level. You've got to talk yourself into quiet brutality to be a blindside or a number 8 like Elrich. You have to do the hardest carries. You have to accept that you're going to be monstered sometimes. Sometimes that just keeps the ball alive for your team. Sometimes you're just cleaning up a dropped ball by someone else, and you're going to have to carry the ball and get killed, and that's still part of your job. So that's the mentals. On his side is a amazing family structure. The kind of pragmatism that you love, culturally, almost accepting really quickly. a humble but confident kind of backdrop. And also I think we have to be there for our players. Rugby hasn't been the best at taking care of players. And I've been working quietly but strongly with World Rugby and other organizations to do better with the money we do have, to set up funds for players when we want them to be gladiators. We're excited and we roar for them to hit harder and run quicker and get back from injury. But sometimes their careers are 2 or 3 years. And sometimes they're 7, and if they're lucky, they're 10, 12, 15, Alwyn Jones types things. But most of that's not, most of them are not Ibn Etzebeth. Most of them are a guy like Jaco Coetzee we're talking about today, you and I, a guy who played games for Western Province or Stormers. Now he's at Bath. He's a physical guy. His job is to be physical, like a Jacques Potgieter who went to the Waratahs. Like specifically, your job is to be a bully, brute, enforcer, man. You're going to get hurt. I mean, that's just life. And the kind of hurt you're going to get is the kind of hurt you get when you get tossed out of a bar by bouncers and you fight in the street. It's the same kind of injury. It's that kind of injury. So we have to do well with them, with longer term pension plans, healthcare plans, especially for our Pacific Island brethren, but also people, just guys from the farm or people who just, playing somewhere and their job is to be rough and tough. That's what I think we have to mature as we, only 30 years old as a sport professionally. We have to get better at that and build the kind of plans. And, shout out to our friends at the Sharks who have probably one of the most progressive and pioneering systems for players there. And that's part of why people go play the Sharks, by the way. It's not just the paycheck up front. They're helping people do business plans. They're helping them look at their life and what if you bust your knee tomorrow, what will you have? And, older players taking younger players aside, a smart guy like Eben taking a younger guy aside and saying, this is why you get sponsorships. This is how you, foot the bill. But listen, we all there for Elrich at this point. It just really gave me kind of a punch because of the way it all happened. And I've been around families watching people. I remember watching this guy, Lucas Glover, playing at the Masters. I was actually there to watch another player, and my clients and I were following that group and happened to be paired up with this guy, Lucas Glover. And he was struggling to make the cut on the Friday at Augusta. And we were trying to follow Charles Watzel and Erdy Else and those guys. And we kept watching this lady who was stressing. She was like wringing her hands. And then 2 or 3 holes into it, we just kept following the same group. We realized, this is Lucas Glover's mom. And she was dying with every shot. Any shot that went off course, didn't find the fairway. And it's just a reminder of how hard it is to be that person, just agonizing with everything. Like I was sitting right next to Stacey Mbanambi watching Bongi go down in the first few minutes of the World Cup final, and the rest of us wondering how that affects the box. She's just wondering, how, is my man okay? And the daughter crying and saying, is Daddy okay? So, it was a reminder of all that. It was still a really good win by the Bulls. And the reason why I say that is because the Lions are no chumps. The Lions play really proper rugby, hard-nosed. They do what they know who they are. And unlike the other franchises that sometimes struggle or sometimes I think to play according to a proper fit for purpose DNA, the Lions know that they're sort of underdoggy and they play that way. They don't make life too hard for themselves, and they were proper in that. To me, the critical moment was when the Bulls decided to not play as much rugby, not invent as much of the action, but to instead use inertia, to use counter, to jujitsu their way into the game by using your opponent's mistakes as your springboard. And, familiar patterns in the red zone, but they kind of came right. Still think the Bulls launched too much of their try-scoring plays from midfield on wish and hope and hit and hope, which is fine when you got athletes. You have a bouncing ball and Buta just toes it up there and, you win the shoulder battle and you score. But it's not the kind of thing that will get you over the line in a semifinal or a final. So the building attack from a starter play, from structured attack, it looks good when the Bulls are building momentum and you get Akar involved and he's carrying like an angry warthog. And the speed with which you slingshot the play, and being almost infringing, realizing that the other side's also infringing on every ruck and is building an advantage story in the ref, then you should also maximize your violence at the ruck as well. Because it's that infringement on the edge, especially when it's done by 2 or 3 ruck cleaners, that's hard for the ref to ping, and then you usually get over the line. Because there's, like I said, every single breakdown, you could ping somebody. And so it's just a matter of telling a different story to the ref. So that went well. The Bulls played really proper tight loose instead of loose tight. And it seemed hard to contain. And in the end, it was clear, the better team won. To your point about brutality, listen, every single derby culture that I know of around the world in collision sports, it's worse in the derby. So when the Waratahs play the Reds, it's worse. When Toulouse plays Toulon, more people get hurt. There's just no way around it. The guys want to show, when you have 2 guys playing at number 8 across from each other, they both went to Paul Ruiz, they want to show which one's boss, Old high school rivalries come out. In their mind, they're like, you're not better than me. I know you're at the box down or not, but I'm still better than you. That's what they think.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you something that caught my eye. Is the Bulls, the ball stuck this time? The skills now. They did quick short passes, and then I can't remember once or twice maybe, but those passes went to hand and they didn't drop the ball. They took a step up in terms of their skills, especially in the first half. A lot of interchanging, interhandling, and the likes. That to me was a step up, don't you think?
I saw that too. It's hard to know. Like, you can work on problem X in week 1, and it only gets fixed in week 4. And then people say, oh, you just fixed it, in week 3. But no, you're working on it for 4 weeks. And there's some lottery aspect to that. And also there could be the height at which the Lions were tackling. So there's some teams like Glasgow tackle pretty high sometimes. And so they can kind of mess up your little tips. I saw that between the forwards as well. It was actually really interesting. The Bulls are playing some big midfielders, so sometimes they can mix their loose forwards and midfielders, and they're all the same size, and it does well. The other thing I noticed, and which might have been a contributing factor, was that the passes were not so gunned at people. Yeah. They were more flipped and
soft hands as well,
sympathetic provision instead of the hospital. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, we talked about that. That was quite a thing. And I wanted to ask you, especially, you talked about the fact that they started playing less rugby, because one of the words that came up often, also in my discussion with Andre, was overplaying. The Bulls stepped back and allowed the other team to play. Now, to me, I wanted to ask you this question. Marcel took over as captain at the end. And what they did there was a clever thing. It was like a chess game. And I think that showed Marcel's maturity, his leadership. He should be the captain. I think there's no doubt about it. Maybe he doesn't always make the starting team, but he's got the head on his shoulders. The Bulls need him. I remember the URC final. I was sitting in the stands right behind them at halfway, and Marcel was on the sidelines because he wasn't playing. And he kept saying to whoever was the wing, I can't remember who was there, and the wing what to do, and the wing would run up to the Bulls and tell them what Marcel was saying. Marcel was running the game from the sidelines. I wonder why Marcel's not the captain.
Marcel's a smart player. The book on him, The Knock, he's a strong character, like strong-minded. Sometimes he might roll his eyes at what a coach says, or he might differ. I actually like that kind of captain as long as they can dial it down with the ref. So I do think that it's fair to say, I wonder if he'll handle it well. Like Amaro Itoje has been named captain of England, for example, right? So the part of us who go, they could go one way or the other. It could be like where the bad boy becomes the prefect or the head boy, and he cleans up his act. And many people have done that. Many players have become a better captain because they have to be the ones to go walk up to the ref every time, and it starts to become very embarrassing if you're the problem. On the other hand, it might cut back on their effectiveness as a player. That's the big question about Maro Itoje, is he's kind of good at being irritating and niggling at the rock, and that's kind of his game, He's got a decade of doing it. So with Marcel, I think he's in a different phase of his life than he used to be, with Sharks, Ulster. I'm not sure all the places he's been, but I think he's matured. And the skill you just pointed out is interesting. Maybe it's him and David Creel conferring as well. It's not just one person. It could be a group. But the knowing, not just from coach input, but knowing yourself, that we need to take 3-meter channels post ruck instead of 7, that we need to fold a little bit quicker, that we are playing too high. I mean, those things need to be corrected on the pitch. If you're waiting for a coach to do that, you're already going under your poles and watching someone take a conversion. So I do think he's got that in his bag now. And I don't want to say that he did it, because it might have been Jake at Oranges telling everyone to do it, and it just implemented, at that time. But regardless, he's a good implementer. And I also know this about Marcel, is he's vocal. He's a talker, and he will make his voice known. I wouldn't underestimate the role of Leroux, of Willie, in this game as well. There was a point where, we had two matches where the 10 went off, the Stormers, and we looked directionless without a 10. No 10, no win. With the Bulls, with Willie being such a practiced and experienced 10, someone who played 10, I think, until he was age 20, and probably secretly always wanted to stay there. I think it did matter, and I saw him doing a lot of direction. So you have Leroux and Marcel on the pitch and directing things together as co-directors. I think that worked. Regardless, it's good news for the Bulls. Everyone knows my feelings about the integrity of the competition, being involved in the Champions Cup, and trying to do your best, and not being too over cute planning. They are well positioned. The Bulls are well positioned in the URC. There is no doubt about it. They have a very nice channel with the game in hand, and they look good. And so I think there should be no excuses from this point on. So having marshaled all resources against the Champions Cup, with the Challenge Cup being, a sideline maybe, the URC, the ERC, is right in front of the Bulls. There is just a really beautiful lane to go. And it all comes down to one thing and one thing only, is can the Bulls consistently convert their opportunities in the 22? Because they're creating plenty. If they can do that, the defense is fine, their set pieces are fine, their depth is as good as everyone else. Everyone has injuries, so there's going to be injuries. They are positioned in a very, very good way.
Well, I want to talk to you about those injuries, because Elrich was injured, but also very importantly, Ruan was injured. Ruan Rokia. I mean, he played a blinder for the couple of minutes he was on the field, saw the lineouts working, he did a couple of storming runs, and he's a captain. He's off. He's injured, and we haven't heard anything from Ruan. We're not ignoring him, which we haven't heard any updates from the Bulls yet on that, and we'll keep you updated. Firstly, secondly, Johan Goosen is injured. He's out. Elrich is now injured. He's out. A couple of others. Well, Kurtley Aronson he's probably not coming back to the Bulls as well. So they've got depth and everything, and they're in the fast lane, or they're properly positioned. But these losses of key personnel that they suffered, how much is that going to affect them? You mentioned that the athletes they need in the 22 to convert, and the way they approach their entries and the likes. It's going to have an impact, isn't it?
Oh, for sure. It's just that over the course of 800, 900 minutes of playing time per player by the end of the URC season, and we look at it, it's almost always the case that the injury edge is infinitesimal, that in the end, you will have your injuries. It will the law of large numbers will catch up, and there'll be a most injured team and there'll be a least injured team. That's sure. Everything's a spectrum, but there's a big clump of teams that will be similar. And the degree to which you plan around that, the cleverness with your platooning and regimenting, not even from on high, not the Springboks telling you, but you yourself knowing which players can go deep, which ones don't. Some players like heavy minutes. Damien Delende has always said, play me more, I get better. Other players are much better when you give them, more of a targeted, planned workload. It also brings up the point of when we miss guys, like I just dropped Jaco Coetzee name for Bath, but he's never going to be this, generational buck. But geez, he's a good player. I give you everything, like Jean Klein for Munster and almost Ireland in the box. He's not a lot of minutes, but you know what you get from him. And so part of the problem for the SA clubs is not just losing stars, not having, the 7, 8, 9 guys in Japan right now we can list off, but it's those mid-range people that when Ruan goes down, you can plug in this very hard workman-like lock who just gets stuck in and doesn't, Herbst for the Harlequins right now, having a good time in London, but he's a hard worker. Never going to be a man of the match. Even when he is the man of the match, he doesn't get the man of the match because he doesn't look like the man of the match. But he's just one of those guys. So that's what the Bulls need, is a stock of locks that they're able to fit in. On the Ruan in particular, I thought the line out and the whole business around the line out, whether you're defending it, feeding it, it looked really good. And if there's one guy I can point to, besides Elrich maybe, Elrich might have been the quickest riser or the biggest riser of 2024, but Ruan's got to be right up there too on a guy who we weren't really focused on, who gained another extra arm and leg being with the box. He really soaked it in. I can imagine him being that guy walking around with a notepad and taking notes. He seemed to really take it seriously. I noticed a guy who always celebrates with other players when they score. And Ruan is the prince of that. It doesn't surprise me he's a captain because he's happy for other people doing well. And that's a huge trait in life. Not just, being there for you when things are wrong, and that's fine, but he's really happy for you. And it has to affect you. My question for you is, did the captaincy go from Ruan to Elrich
Yes.
to Marcel?
Yes.
In one match? That is rough. That's a tough way to communicate with each other. And, I think going forward, probably solidity. The only footnote I'll give you about Marcel is he is a guy who has tended to be injured. And, part of captaincy is making sure that, that your captain is on the field.
Yeah, and he's not necessarily the first choice player as well. I mean, you've got Namakaba there. Yeah, even Nizam Kar, lots of them. Okay, I wanted to just talk about the Lions a little bit. We often get accused of neglecting the Lions. You saw that.
We do. I think we do neglect them sometimes.
Yeah, but I mean, I wanted to ask you about the question. Somebody raised the issue of slow poison. The Lions did a lot of defending in the first half of the first half, even the first 30 minutes, and then they started coming back. And they did pretty well before halftime, and after halftime, they should have done better. And even before halftime, they should have done a little bit better as well. But they were in the game. But do you think that slow poison had an effect at the end? Because I want to give them credit because they played pretty damn well. I actually said to Andre after halftime, I think the Bulls are out of it. I think it's gone, especially with the injuries and the likes. I mean, they fought back and it was a very impressive victory at the end of the day. But give the Lions kudos. I mean, they played pretty damn well. They planned it properly. Henke van Wyk is someone to watch. You talk about Ethan Hooker. I tell you what, Henke van Wyk is another star in the making. Yo.
Yeah, he is. He's a bundle. He's hard to put down. He's the kind of guy like you think he's down and he's not. He's in no way comparable to Donny Gerber. But the point is, a guy you think is down that's not down is the most dangerous guy on the rugby pitch, because it's not set up that way. If I'm in the line and I think if my mate over here has got the guy tackled, I'm not circling back around. I'm just assuming you made the tackle. So those line breaks are deadly. And he looks like a line break waiting to happen all the time, Henko. No, I think the Lions we should judge them, always, my analogy is always like if you had a car race and, the Ferrari could race the Volkswagen and then next to it was like the Fiat, and over here was the Pinto, and over here was the, whatever that Soviet car was. I forget the name.
Lada.
Yeah, the Lada. I mean, it's like, what are you doing with what you've got? There's a fantastic statistic in the Premiership of football in England where they devised a way to compare goalkeepers instead of doing the lazy thing of saying who has shutouts, who has the most, clean sheets, what's the average goals conceded, which has almost nothing to do with the goalkeeper. I mean, if someone's got 7 shots on goal in anger and you save 5 and 2 go in, that's amazing, and so they were able to take each shot and devise this method, almost like golf, of makeable putts. And then you compare apples to apples, and you see why sometimes one of the lower ranked goalkeepers in the league, one of the worst teams, is one of the best goalkeepers for England or for Brazil. And so I think, you have to look at the Lions and see that across the board, there's not a player there that when they line up against the best clubs where it's clear that they have an edge. They might have some parity sometimes. Frankie Horn is really good. Henko's great. You have players there that could compete and get onto the squads, but it's not clear. Whereas in your other squads, and you look at someone like Dobson's got some people that are elite in the world, and why is he not inventing a mismatch that you like? Why are you not able to create 14, 16, 20 times where our mismatches are clear? That's literally what Leinster does. That's the entire game plan is, okay, we have 7 or 8 people here that are clearly the better. We have 5 that are okay, even, and then we have 2 and we want to hide. And then make sure that you don't find the ones that they're hiding. And then they use their 7 or 8 clearly superior players to exercise their. So I think with the Lions, you cannot come away without being impressed. I'm just always impressed that they built a strong season in the beginning, a bit of a struggle, but they're always in every game. I never feel like they're embarrassed. I never feel like what I did with the Stormers in Dublin, watching it and just going, what is this? They really do try to obey the doctrines of rugby.
No, I like that. And that's actually the perfect segue to the Stormers game. We published your immediate reaction. I'm going to put the link on the screen here. I enjoyed that so much. I laughed so much when I watched it. Tell me about your Stormers debacle. You called it a farce. And people were saying, we're not, what's the word? Leinster-tained. We're not Leinster-tained.
That was a good one. That's a great quote. Whoever said that, that was funny. Leinster named a B. So, beginning of the season, you say Stormers go to Leinster. This time of year, we go automatic win for Leinster. But then they name the team sheets, and because of the context of the larger season and what Leinster is trying to do, you go, Stormers actually man for man. If you look at the team sheets, we're probably a little bit better, more experienced. If you take away a couple of people like Jordy Barrett and Sleiman, you go, more caps, definitely more speed. You think, we should be right there. And there's a big if. The if is, can we complete 1 out of every 7 lineouts? That's all I want. That's all I want. I don't want, look, I'm not telling you got to do 6 out of 7. I'm saying the other way around. You can throw 6 straight lineouts to Dan Sheehan instead of Ruben van Heerden, but we're still there, right? No. It was absolutely farcical. And for someone who can play as well as he does on the breakdown, carry as hard, Joe Dweba is a nightmare to have as your hooker throwing important throws. And given these were actually attacking lineouts, these were lineouts you've won the privilege to have a lineout. The interesting story, though, is how bad Leinster were at lineouts. Dan Sheehan coming back from a really, really tough injury, not that different from Elrich. And Dan Sheehan, I think, won man of the match. But he shouldn't have, because he was atrocious at lineout too. There was this very funny sequence where the 2 hookers kept throwing the ball to each other at lineouts. It's almost like they had a pact. And it was overthrow. All of them were overthrows. There was no underthrows and not very many steals even. So it was clearly on the hooker. Sometimes there's a mismatch, there's a bad call, there's a bad lift. No, look, Sheehan, if you're missing Sleiman at the top of his leap with one handed up, the size of a baseball glove, you're rusty. So he was rusty. And so there was a point where Leinster more smartly Leo Cullen was smarter than Dobson on the day. Dobbo just kept doing it. Oh, let's just keep kicking the ball out on purpose if we win a penalty, and we'll just hope that this time Joe gets it right. No, Leon just told Dan that this punishment for being such a bad thrower at lineout is he has to do the tap and go. And there's nothing in rugby that's more painful than being the tap and go guy where you have to run into a massed defense on the goal line where they're only 5 meters away because there's nowhere else to back up to. You're going to get punished. But they started doing tap and goes from 40 meters out, from 50. And then they started doing tap and goes from everywhere or just hoofing the ball. Leinster realized we cannot throw a line out. On the scrums, it was equal carnage, pretty badly reffed. Sorry. I do not like criticizing refs, but that was just complete horseshit. Fouché was really bemused at some point. But yeah, it's one of those games where if you just make your line outs, if you just do proper rugby stuff. And my thing about that is how long inside each practice for the Stormers are they doing line outs? And I'll tell you right now, a very large percentage. So I have no idea why you keep selecting someone. What you're saying is there's no standards. What you're saying is we accept those standards because you wouldn't do that on kicking for poles. Well, I guess we do sometimes. You wouldn't do that for someone who always knocked on, like if I just always knocked on the ball every time you threw it to me, I would not get selected. And that level of high line out throwing is the same as knocking on. And not only that, it's probably your best launch pad for a try. So rather than be depressed and become agitated, I just decided to treat it as a farce. It was like a satire. It was like, slapstick comedy where the big thing is someone falls over a couch and, falls on their face. That's funny. It is funny. But it had to be. Otherwise, I would be very upset. There were good moments. You can see that the Stormers, if properly led, properly devised, would be a handful for anybody. And you can also see something really big on the Leinster side, which is if you throw James Lowe, Geordie Barrett, Archie Neyman, and Slimani, the French prop, as a spine onto a team with a lot of other players that you don't know that well, it's still a really good team. The Nienaber defense works not just with the top line players. It's the specific thing that makes a defensive coach and a defensive orientated team really cool is that it plays well with almost anyone you throw in, as long as they accept the blitz, the barge, and the big hit. And the barge was on evidence. Every single Stormers ruck, especially against the vet, was compromised. And so it was really difficult to launch. It was 23 minutes before we launched any proper, clean attack play. And then we, of course, kicked the ball away.
So Dion Fourie was complaining to the ref about, I think, Ergie's name on upsetting their calls in Afrikaans, apparently, or something.
The ref was right. He said, it may not be sportsmanlike, and I'm sure it's irritating to you, but it's legal.
Yeah, shame, man. I wanted to ask you, the line, I think, just getting back. Yes, Debo had a horrific day, and it's not the first time he's had a horrific day, but the previous game or game or two ago, Andre Gevente did equally bad in the lineouts.
Gevente was bad this time too.
I didn't watch all of the game, but there's a systematic problem there. There's more than just somebody, not finding his kid. There's something that they need to work on. I mean, the Bulls fixed it with Ruan Arkeer coming back. It's maybe just a question of personnel.
I mean, look, I divided it into 3-act play on purpose. The first act of the play was a certain thing. And second, it was when will Dwepa go off? And then he did. And then so on my final act of the play, Fenter comes on and does the same thing. He overthrows the ball. And I go, oh, there's just nothing going to happen today from lineouts. No, I mean, if you watch any lineout practice, they all practice together. So there's not a presupposition on who starts. All hookers go in a rotation. For the box, all 3 guys, even the one who's not suited up and ready to play, does the practice. They all have similar aspects. There's someone on a ladder. There's someone with a giant pole. There's someone who has a little, fisherman's net, whatever. They find a way to train it. I've seen Jamie George do it. One of the most accurate, measured accurate throwers in our lifetime. And he just hits the crossbar of the poles. He doesn't really practice so much for that exact height. He is practiced on hitting a target. And so whatever the target is, he can hit it. You'd be surprised how long he can stand there and hit the crossbar, and it's with ease. He has the Bismarck type release where he gets both hands up, and the release is from two hands. He's not a big dominant one hand guy. It's minimal. It's got very few moving parts. I almost feel like Jamie George and the good hookers that throw like that turn their body into a machine. And when I watch some bad line-out throwers, I realize they're too floppy. You have too much wrist, too much elbow. They cock the ball too much behind their head. They're almost always about to bulk, and any little thing bothers them. So Leinster, knowing that, Archie he was skilled. He was so good. He got into the middle, and then the ref would make him go back. But he always did it anyway, knowing the ref would say, move back, and then he would do it. But he would always do it first. Okay, so that's an interruption. That's a thing. Now, what do you think if you're Joe? I'm thinking Archie is there. I just saw him. He was there. Is he back? Where is he? Are you looking in the wrong place? They always moved over, and then the ref started moving Joe over. So Joe was taking a backward step. So, Leinster was moving the line out back just by doing that. And that's Victor Matfield right there. That is Blue Bulls. Is always line up in the neutral zone. Always line up in the neutral zone. Always touch your opponent. Always put your hand on him. Always whisper things to him. Make sure the line out is a horrible experience. So, yeah, a lot of it's psychological. But, the good thing about it is it's fixable. If there's one thing in rugby you can fix, it's a line out. You have so many options. You can throw to the front. You can dumb it down. If you're number two, if you're a front jumper, your number two guy in the line out is properly lifted and you go quickly, you're almost always going to get that ball. Now, it's not great ball, but oh my God, I'm going to just, punch myself in the face next time my team starts using line outs for launch when we know we cannot complete one, when you have other options. You can scrum, you can tap and go. You can just accept the fact that right now it's a bad idea. If that game gets played a different way and the Stormers don't just keep doing the same thing and throwing lineouts away, that would be a tough game. They would be down to the wire. It would be a kick here or there.
I wanted to ask you a little bit, still on the subject of Joseph Dwebo. You talked about the action, the cocking action and the likes. Isn't his shoulders too big, his mobility a bit impaired? Just looks to be so uncomfortable,
There is a reason why you don't see a lot of golfers, with, strapping deltoids. And, there's the old theory in any swing sport like golf, cricket, baseball, where it inhibits you to have too giant a chest and you want to keep a lot of flexibility in your shoulders. I don't know. It's interesting. I'd have to have more facts around it, but I do think that Joe is not able to repeat the same action with the same outcome consistently. And so that to me is probably even down to how he's holding the ball. I mean, okay, take the most obvious example in sport, which is the toss on your serve in tennis. Like there's no one in the whole world can affect that. And some people use too many fingers on it and it ends up being variant. If you release the ball at the top of your arm from the palm by opening your hand and letting that thing go up, 2 feet, it's going to be the same. It's unbelievably the same. And then you can land that ball, right in front of your foot, exactly where you want to. And the good tennis players can do that forever. I mean, very, very, very few variants. This might sound weird, but I'd almost work with Joe on other things. Like how many times can you throw a wadded up piece of paper into the rubbish? Exactly. Can you bounce it off the wall? Take a tennis ball, throw it against the wall. I want you to land it the same place. It's almost like repetitive movements that you get your eyes and your hand ready. They've clearly said, throw it into this area over and over. It's not working. I would do different things with him, or I would turn him into not a hooker, or I'd do the Springbok thing and say, somebody else is throwing into the lineouts. Why are we so inextricably wedded to this idea of a hooker throwing? Yeah. Why? What's the point? You think Paul de Vet couldn't do better at the lineout? I'm sure he could. A scrum half is almost always going to be okay throwing a ball to a target.
Okay, I wanted to ask you this question. You talked about, you saw the team sheets, you saw the Stormers, you had a chance, and then the team that pitched up, the way they played didn't match up. Basics. It comes down to coaching. Is John Dobson's nice guy act, I don't want to call it more than that, he's a very nice guy, everybody loves him, but is he out of his depth now? Is he technically limited? Is he being found out now?
He is a very nice guy, like for real, genuine. I don't know it so much as that a lack from the beginning, it's a lack of refreshment. And the problem with being in the final, of winning and then being in the final, is everyone works you out. Like, you get studied. There's this adage going on right now that the Leinster is the most studied club team in the world. And so they have to always do something new. That's why they had to add Nienaber. They were already successful, but they had to add someone. The biggest danger facing the Springboks is, what if we are the same as we are now in 2027? Well, that's too many years to study us. So I think Dobbo has good talent and he has good schemes, but there's this unwillingness or inability to play tight. And that game cried out for a tight approach and to steer the game into where I thought we actually had many advantages, which was in the tight. Because even though Sneeman's incredible, he doesn't play very tight. So if you could force the game to be played on your terrain, sort of a Sun Tzu kind of thing, play where I want to, in the field of my choosing, at the right time. And so that's why a kicking game can help you there, because the one thing in, look at the French right now, Dupont and Ramos, they can make you play where they want you to play. And that's more than half the battle. So the Stormers right now are saying, hey, you have a turn, I have a turn, and let's see what happens. And this kind of willy-nilly hectic chaos theory, it's not working for us, and it will not work for us against a properly coached Nienaber defense that will not give you anything easy. I think they leaked one at the end, which Jacques would be upset about, but it was 7 points for the longest time. And so, they didn't have to even score that much. They went ahead and did it. I do think, Mani Lubbock's injury was a worry because his leg was heavily strapped to begin with. Then he takes a knock while he's kicking. I think it was one of those songs where he's kicking it up and under and he kind of gets whacked, legal, and the person was committed already. I'm a bit worried about that. And you saw how quickly the game went out of shape, not just from losing Mani, but losing a 10. And there was no other 10. It wasn't like there was a Vili, So Gelant comes on and tries to do that. Next thing that happens is there's a try scored because he wasn't sure if he was a 10 or a 15 in defense. So, not every team practices scenarios enough if you're going to go 6-2 on the bench or 7-1, God forbid. But if you go 6-2, you better have a plan of every single scenario and practice it in practice and say, when does the line break, who's my scramble defense, and so on.
In 2 weeks' time, it's us against you guys down in Cape Town. Bulls against the Stormers. Yeah, yes. It's going to be one. That's going to be interesting. But anyway, let's move on to the Sharks quickly. Pitching up at Cardiff, normally it will be a walk in the park, but they've never beaten the Cardiff. But the Sharks have never beaten Cardiff. That's the first thing. And Cardiff is third in the log. Sharks had a better season than last year, but they got whooped last week against Bordeaux. I mean, whooped is it's not even a strong enough word. Yet they managed to pull this one through, and they did it convincingly. I mean, that's a tick in the box. Game well played, team well coached for the difference. What did you think?
I mean, Sharks, depending on some of the results that could still happen in the French league, but probably still, I think Sharks are back in the Harry Index in top 10. They have the kind of a type of old court horses for courses type game where they can vary. They can throw different looks at you from 9. Clearly, they can play a proper tight game in the forwards if they want to. I think it's a very respectable win. I think Cardiff, at this time of the year, to notch a win there with this Cardiff, actually very good. Any away win in these leagues. But rugby itself has been up and down. You talked about the hiding in Bordeaux and then the recovery, but that's been happening with Leicester Tigers, Sale Sharks. It's happened with La Rochelle, Bristol. I mean, it's very difficult this year to know who's who and what's what, because you have these misfit competitions, you have these cup competitions, these league competitions. You do have, like I said, a lot of injury that's prevalent. And so it's very difficult to know who rocks up and who shows up. The conditions go against you. Many times in the Northern Hemisphere, this time of year, the wind and the actual weather can dictate an extremely different outcome. I would say the Sharks are well poised. I'm not convinced by Plumtree's innovativeness either. I think he might be the one driving the Ferrari not very well, and maybe there's people like Cash that are doing better. But he does have a proper team, and that's kudos to Marco and the boys there who assembled the team. And if you don't like the wheeling dealing and the money side of club rugby, you don't like club rugby. Club rugby is all about that. Club rugby, what are the most compelling clubs? NFL, the Premiership, the La Liga, Barcelona. It's all about amassing the best team. So front office, back office, whatever. Sharks is doing what you have to do and holding on to the talent. So now they have to produce. The home stretch is very, very interesting for the big three. I think it's going to be tough for the Lions. I think it's going to be tough. I think they might hold on and be in the top 8, but I think all 4 might make the playoffs. And I just got through shit talking the Stormers, but my team is going to be okay because there's a very, very comfortable home run. Not just home run, but also playing some teams that should be beaten on the back end. Once we get by the Bulls, there's some good matchups.
Yeah, sure. Twice now. You have to face the Bulls twice. And you sent me a very optimistic prediction of how your season's going to turn out. It didn't start that well.
Hopeful.
Very hopeful. Delusional, I would say. I sent you
a really bad start on that.
I sent you a article this morning that was published in a report by Hendrik Cornier, where it came out that SA teams actually have 146 million rand budget rather than the 85, which we've all been talking about. Now, it's still a drop in the ocean compared to what the French teams do or have, but a lot more money than we anticipated. I mean, what's it now? 46 plus 15 is 61 million rand more than that's including the money that they get from Saru for the pony players and likes. But I mean, it puts a bit of a different spin on things, doesn't it?
Yeah, and also purchasing power ratios and cost of living index, it does narrow the gap. $1 spends longer in Pretoria than it does in Paris. But there's also some things that don't change, like flights. There's certain logistics that are the same price no matter what. So you'd prefer to have the 49 million euro budget. You're still about a 1-to-7 ratio on funny money at the root. But funny money alone won't save you. There's plenty of billionaires in the English system that are funneling money into their clubs because they view their club sometimes as a marketing arm for their other bigger portfolio. And it doesn't mean that club ends up, Harlequins doesn't really rule, even though they're very rich. Leicester still got the hiding, even though they've got incredible wealth, Northampton. Saracens. So it's more what you do with it. And anyway, it doesn't matter. So that serving clubs are not going to get anywhere by bemoaning the fact of the gap. It exists. Next year, we become stakeholders in those comps, and so some of that money will change. It's still interesting. It's almost like if you're a farmer or if you're someone who breeds incredible horses. If you have the right stock and if you have the right conditions, you're still going to breed some incredible athletes, and you're training them when they're young and impressionable. Our biggest gap is not with the money that it takes to pay players. It's our coaches. We don't have the depth of acumen and analysis seated at those tables. Some of the best are abroad, and some of them are light years ahead of where they used to be. They're being exposed to different ways of thinking, a much higher level of professionalism. And so, hopefully when they come back, or they can come back, a Franco or Johan, or these guys can sort of bring some of that. But we've seen what that can do. I mean, even an example of Tony Brown at the box. I'm not saying that he's revolutionized things, but he really brought some attacking edge. And it was interesting to see. Same players, some of the same players who were under Alistair Coetzee losing 57-0. Same general core of players can play very differently under Rassi, Jacques, and these other guys that know what they're doing. So I think I would put up most of my efforts in at Saru and with the clubs itself is to getting assistant coach. I'm not about head coaches even, just assistant coaching, analysts. Angus, the analyst who tweets a lot, works in England, and he was telling me the difference between like some of the top football clubs there will have 7 or 8 analysts getting involved in almost a lab post every match, and they really work it, and then they spit out these results, and then Arsenal, Liverpool can really make a change. So I do think there's unused, and these are not expensive. Like it's just a matter of committing to the idea of having a true analyst bank, and really telling a coach, even a guy like Jake, whom I think he knows everything about rugby, but no one does. It's a weird sport. And also the reason I would say that too is because, and Jake will be the first one to admit this, is the game changes a lot, not just from the physical aspect, but because the laws and emphasis changes. You look at the Autumn Nation series and how much it changed by a simple thing, which is you cannot block, you cannot escort the chasers of a kick. Boom. I mean, the whole game changed. And it was the first time it was Angus Gardner saying access, access, access on the very first big game on the Autumn Nation series, and everything changed. The minute you start saying that, it's different. And so having analytics in your club that's able to say, now, if that's the case, then we need to kick more to this quadrant this many times with these chasers and be able to change your plan. And without a doubt, I can see that the clubs that are really winning, not only do they have the best players, they have a Jacques Nienaber who's doing things differently than everyone else. Everyone said the blitz was dumb. Everyone said connection was the key in rugby. If you split your defensive line, you're done. Everyone said missed tackles was a good stat. And Jacques Nienaber said, no, none of that's true.
Right. That was a long one. Thank you for that. I just wanted to say best wishes to all these players that got injured, Marnie as well, and everybody else. And I just wish for one thing, and that's the unions actually go to the trouble of telling us what's going on. The Sharks are good at that. When they do the team sheets, they show these players are not available due to injury, but just give us a bit of an update. I mean, there's a lot of, I can't tell you how many WhatsApp I got from people and calls. Do I know what's happened to Elrich, or do I know what's going to happen to Ruan? What's the situation? Help us a bit, just to, put people's minds at ease, because it was something that you saw on TV and it was horrific. It's never a nice thing. So I'm actually asking you guys, the Bulls specifically, tell us what's going on. Thanks, Harry. Appreciate that.
Cheers.
It's the Lekker Rugby Pod, only on Megaphone Rugby.